When two arrogant cops assaulted a Latina woman in court, they had no idea she was about to be named their new police chief, and justice would be served right in their own house. The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was buzzing with its usual Monday morning chaos. Attorneys shuffled through stacks of paperwork, clerks rushed between offices, and families crowded the long benches of the waiting area. In the middle of it all, an elegant but unassuming woman sat quietly, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and she carried herself with the calm poise of someone used to command. But no one around her suspected just how much authority she truly held. Her name was Isabella Ramirez, a decorated officer with 2 decades of service. Only a select few knew that after years of undercover work, high-profile busts, and tireless leadership, she had just been appointed the new chief of police for the entire city. The announcement hadn't yet been made public, and Isabella had decided to appear in court that morning not as the chief, but as a concerned citizen attending a hearing for a close family friend. For Isabella, the courthouse was familiar ground. She had testified here countless times in her career, usually in uniform, but today she wanted to blend into the crowd. She kept her badge tucked away in her handbag, hidden beneath her phone and wallet. To the officers on duty, she looked like any other Latina woman waiting for her turn before the judge. But blending in would not save her from what was about to happen. 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom, late for their shift. Their body language screamed arrogance. They moved with the swagger of men who believed they owned the room. Officer Jenkins, tall and broad-shouldered, smirked as he adjusted his belt. His partner, Officer Blake, followed close behind, his eyes scanning the benches like a hawk looking for prey. Both men were known inside the department for their aggressive policing and their habit of targeting people they deemed less important. Unfortunately for Isabella, their gaze landed squarely on her. Blake leaned into Jenkins and muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "Look at her, sitting there like she owns the place, probably here for some cousin on trial." Jenkins chuckled. "Yeah, another one of those who think the system owes them something." Isabella didn't flinch, though her jaw tightened. She had heard that tone before, the dripping contempt, the casual assumption that because she was Latina, she must be connected to trouble. Years on the force had taught her how dangerous unchecked prejudice could be, and now it was staring her in the face from 2 men who wore the same badge she had sworn to honor. When the bailiff called for order, Isabella rose politely to give her friend a reassuring nod as the judge entered. But as she stood, Jenkins and Blake blocked her path. "Hey, sit down," Jenkins barked, his voice low but threatening. "I'm not disrupting anything," Isabella replied calmly. Didn't ask what you were doing," Blake interrupted, stepping closer. "You think you can just stroll around like you own the courtroom? Sit down before we make you." Several heads turned from the benches. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isabella inhaled deeply, fighting the urge to pull her badge out and end the nonsense immediately. But something in her gut told her to wait, to see just how far these men were willing to go when they thought no one important was watching. "I'm here lawfully," she said firmly. "You're out of line." Her composure only seemed to enrage them further. Jenkins reached for her arm, gripping it tighter than necessary, while Blake shoved her shoulder back toward the bench. "You're done talking," Jenkins sneered. "Sit down." The entire courtroom froze as the sight of 2 officers manhandling a woman in professional attire unfolded. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the commotion had already taken on a life of its own. "Hey, you can't treat her like that," shouted a man from the benches. But Jenkins shot him a glare that silenced him instantly. Isabella, however, didn't stay silent. With years of tactical training hardwired into her, she shifted her weight, twisting her arm free from Jenkins' grip with a swift move. The suddenness of it startled him, and his hand slipped away. "Don't put your hands on me," she warned, her voice sharp now. Blake's face twisted in anger. "You resisting? That's obstruction right there." He lunged forward, trying to restrain her, but Isabella stepped back gracefully, avoiding his grasp. The tension snapped. Within seconds, the 2 officers had turned a quiet courtroom into a full-blown spectacle. They grabbed for her again, this time harder, ignoring the gasps and cries from the audience. Isabella stumbled slightly as Blake shoved her toward the wooden rail, her handbag falling open on the floor. Papers and her phone scattered, but tucked among them, gleaming under the fluorescent light, was her chief's badge. No one noticed it yet. Not Jenkins. Not Blake. Not even the judge who was shouting for security to restore order. The sight of Isabella being shoved around sparked outrage in the courtroom. A woman seated nearby jumped up. "She didn't do anything, stop it!" But Jenkins growled, "Mind your business," as he forced Isabella's arms behind her back. She could have ended it right then. She could have declared her position, ordered them to release her, and revealed who she was. But instead she held back, gritting her teeth as the metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. Every second that passed was exposing them. Every shove, every insult, every abuse of authority. "You're making a mistake," Isabella said quietly, locking eyes with Jenkins. He laughed. "The only mistake was you thinking you had rights in here. The arrogance, the cruelty, the utter blindness to who they were dealing with." It boiled Isabella's blood. But still she remained calm, because she knew that very soon their world was going to shatter. As the officers dragged her toward the holding cell at the side of the courtroom, Isabella's badge lay on the floor, glinting like a silent promise of the storm that was about to come. And when the truth finally hit them, it would be far too late for apologies. The heavy steel door of the courthouse holding cell clanged shut behind Isabella, leaving her in a cramped windowless room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and rust. She sat down on the metal bench, the cold cuffs biting into her wrists. She could have ended this farce at any moment, but she chose silence. She wanted to see how far Jenkins and Blake's arrogance would take them, because she knew the moment the truth came out, the damage to their careers and the department's reputation would be irreversible. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, chaos erupted. Spectators still whispered in disbelief, unable to process what they had just witnessed. A woman in the gallery pulled out her phone, whispering, "I got it all recorded," while a young man shook his head angrily. "They can't just do that to someone who didn't even resist." "That's messed up," the judge pounded his gavel furiously. "Order, order in this court," he shouted, his voice echoing against the high ceilings. His frustration wasn't just at the disruption. It was at the humiliation of watching his courtroom turned into a stage for police misconduct. "Bailiff," the judge barked, "I want a full report of what just happened, and bring those officers back in here, now." Jenkins and Blake, however, were too busy congratulating themselves as they handed Isabella off to the detention deputy. "Another troublemaker handled," Jenkins muttered, smirking as he signed the booking sheet. Blake leaned against the wall with a laugh. "Did you see the look on her face? Thought she could talk back to us. Guess she learned." The deputy receiving Isabella raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable. She was professional, polite, and calm, nothing like the disruptive person the officers described. And when he noticed the gleam of her fallen badge among the scattered belongings they had shoved into an evidence bag, his eyes went wide. Jenkins," the deputy said cautiously, holding up the badge. "What's this?" Jenkins squinted, then scoffed. "Probably fake. People buy knockoff badges online all the time." But Blake wasn't so sure. The detailing looked real, and the inscription on the back wasn't the kind you found on counterfeits. Still, arrogance won out over reason. "Don't worry about it," Blake said, waving the deputy off. "We'll add impersonating an officer to her list of charges." Isabella, seated calmly in the cell, looked up. Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "That's the story you're going with?" she asked quietly. "Impersonating an officer?" Jenkins slammed the bars with his palm. "You better shut your mouth. You'll be lucky if you're out of here in a year." Her eyes locked on his with a steady fire. "You'll be lucky if you still have a badge by the end of the day." Back in the courtroom, the ripple effect had begun. The judge's clerk hurried in, breathless, carrying a phone. "Your Honor, we've already got 3 complaints filed to the courthouse hotline about what happened in here. Some witnesses say the officers assaulted a woman without cause." The judge's face tightened. He had served on the bench for nearly 2 decades, and he had seen plenty of overzealous officers before, but rarely in his own courtroom, and never with such blatant disregard for procedure. "Bring those officers in here immediately," he repeated, his voice like thunder. The bailiff sprinted toward the holding area. Meanwhile, word of the incident was spreading. In the hallway outside the courtroom, people who had seen the scuffle began calling relatives, friends, and even local reporters. "I swear they dragged her out for nothing," one woman exclaimed over the phone. "She didn't do a thing. They just grabbed her. Within minutes, the courthouse's central lobby buzzed with whispers about two cops roughing up a Latina woman. The story grew with every retelling. Some said she was a lawyer. Others guessed she was connected to City Hall. No one knew the truth, that she was their soon-to-be-announced chief of police. But the speculation was enough to fan the flames. Inside the cell, Isabella sat with perfect posture, watching as Jenkins paced like a caged lion. His arrogance was beginning to crack, though he masked it with bravado. "You think anyone cares what happens to you?" he taunted. "People like you, always playing victim. Guess what? We write the reports. We decide the story." Isabella tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Funny thing about stories," she said softly. "The truth has a way of writing itself, especially when the wrong people are watching." Blake frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," Isabella replied, leaning back against the wall. Moments later, the bailiff arrived with orders from the judge. "Bring the officers back to the courtroom now." Jenkins rolled his eyes. "What, we're in trouble for doing our job?" The bailiff's stern glare was answer enough. When they re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The gallery was no longer just curious, it was hostile. Dozens of eyes glared at them with barely concealed anger. The judge sat tall, his expression like stone. "Officers Jenkins and Blake," the judge began, his voice cold. "This courtroom is not your playground. I watched as you escalated an encounter with a woman who had not broken a single rule in my court. You will explain yourselves immediately." Jenkins squared his shoulders. "Your Honor, the woman was disruptive. She ignored our commands. We restrained her for the safety of the court." The judge slammed his gavel once. "Do not lie to me in my courtroom." A hush fell. The officers shifted uncomfortably. And then, from the back of the courtroom, the deputy who had received Isabella's belongings stepped forward. In his hand, held up for all to see, was her badge. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "this was among her possessions. It's real, and it's not just any badge." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "It's the badge of the city's incoming chief of police." Gasps exploded through the room. Whispers turned to shouts of shock. Jenkins and Blake froze, their faces draining of color. The judge's expression hardened. "Chief?" "Yes, Your Honor," the deputy confirmed. "She's Chief Isabella Ramirez. The appointment was supposed to be announced this week." All eyes turned to the officers. Their bravado was gone. For the first time, fear flickered across their faces. The judge leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Officers, do you understand what you've done?" Back in the holding cell, Isabella listened to the muffled uproar echoing through the halls. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. The moment of revelation had come, and the tide was turning. Her time for silence was over. Soon she would walk back into that courtroom, not as a victim, but as the most powerful officer in the city. And the men who had mocked her, shoved her, and cuffed her would be forced to face the truth. They hadn't just assaulted a woman, they had assaulted their new boss. The heavy lock of the holding cell clicked open, and the deputy stepped aside. "Chief Ramirez," he said respectfully, his voice quieter now. "The judge has requested your presence back in the courtroom." "They know?" Isabella rose with calm precision, her wrists still cuffed. She lifted them slightly, raising an eyebrow. The deputy's face flushed with embarrassment. "My apologies," he said quickly, fumbling for the key. "Those two idiots didn't tell us who you were. I'll get these off immediately." As the cuffs clattered to the floor, Isabella rubbed her wrists and gave a small, almost amused smile. "Don't worry. Sometimes the best lessons come from being underestimated." With that, she picked up her belongings, including the badge Jenkins had called fake, and walked out of the cell with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. When the doors of the courtroom swung open, the room erupted in whispers. "That's her. She's the new chief? I can't believe those cops did that." Isabella walked forward steadily, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her presence commanding without needing to shout. Her eyes scanned the gallery, the judge, the bailiff, and finally the two officers who had attacked her. Jenkins and Blake stood stiff, pale and sweating under the gaze of the entire room. The judge rose from his bench, visibly relieved to see her. "Chief Ramirez," he said, his voice carrying both respect and a hint of apology. "It is an honor. I regret that our courtroom has become the setting of such disgraceful conduct." Isabella inclined her head slightly, her expression calm but firm. "Thank you, Your Honor. I am not here for apologies. I am here for accountability." Her words sliced through the air like steel. Jenkins tried to recover, stepping forward with a shaky grin. "Chief, we didn't know who you were." "If we'd known—" "Exactly," Isabella interrupted, her voice sharp now. "You didn't know. And because you didn't, you thought you could treat me however you wanted. Tell me, Officer Jenkins, does the badge on your chest grant you the right to shove women around because you think they're unimportant?" Jenkins opened his mouth, but no words came out. She turned to Blake. "And you, accusing me of resisting, of obstruction, when all I did was stand my ground. Tell me, Officer Blake, how many innocent people have you written up, locked up, or silenced because you assumed your word would outweigh theirs?" The silence was suffocating. Every eye in the courtroom burned into the officers, their shame unfolding in public view. Isabella stepped closer, her tone steady and unwavering. "I've worn this badge for 20 years. I've been undercover in the most dangerous gangs in this city. I've led raids that dismantled cartels, and I've buried friends who gave their lives in the line of duty. And yet today in this courtroom, 2 of my own officers treated me like a criminal because of how I look." She let the words sink in, her gaze sweeping over the gallery. "This is why communities don't trust us. This is why mothers tell their children to fear us. Not because of the badge itself, but because of the men and women who abuse it." The crowd erupted in applause. The judge didn't stop them this time. Jenkins, desperate, stammered, "Chief, we thought you were disruptive. We were just following procedure." "Procedure?" Isabella snapped, her voice like thunder now. "Procedure is de-escalation. Procedure is protecting the dignity of the courtroom. What you did wasn't procedure. It was ego. It was prejudice. And it was assault." Blake swallowed hard, his face red. "You didn't mean?" Isabella cut him off again. "What you meant doesn't matter. What you did matters. Your intentions don't erase your actions." The gallery cheered louder now, people standing on their feet. The officers looked like cornered animals, their bravado completely stripped away. The judge leaned forward, clearly moved by Isabella's words. "Chief Ramirez, how would you like this court to proceed?" Isabella turned to face the entire room, her voice calm once more. "This is bigger than me. Today I can forgive the insults. I can even forgive the bruises on my wrists. But what I cannot forgive is the pattern. Officers like these 2 create the headlines that destroy community trust. They tarnish the honor of those who serve with integrity." She paused, letting the silence deepen. "My recommendation is that Officers Jenkins and Blake be placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation. Their conduct here today proves they are unfit to serve without review." The judge nodded solemnly. "So ordered." The gavel slammed. As the bailiff stepped forward to escort the disgraced officers out, Jenkins broke. "Chief, please, you don't understand. We're good cops. This was just a misunderstanding." Isabella's gaze was cold, unflinching. "If this is how you act in a courtroom in front of a judge, imagine how you act on the streets when no one is watching. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a liability." The crowd gasped, murmuring in agreement. The officers were led away, heads bowed in shame. When the courtroom settled again, the judge addressed Isabella with respect. "Chief Ramirez, today has revealed both the worst and the best of our system. The worst, in the arrogance of those who thought themselves untouchable. The best in your composure, your strength, and your example." Isabella nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor, but this is just the beginning. If I am to lead this city's police force, then accountability must start here. Today is proof that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." The gallery rose to their feet, applause thundering through the courtroom. For Isabella, it wasn't about revenge. It was about sending a message. And as she stood tall, the badge glinting proudly on her chest, she knew that message had been heard loud and clear. But outside the courthouse, news vans were already arriving. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones ready, cameras rolling. The world was about to learn what had happened inside, how 2 arrogant officers had attacked their own incoming chief, and Isabella Ramirez was about to face her first true test as police chief, turning a scandal into a new standard of justice. The moment Isabella stepped out of the courthouse, the midday sun hit her face, but it wasn't the light that blinded her. It was the glare of cameras. News vans lined the curb. Reporters pushed against the barricades and microphones jutted forward like a field of spears. Chief Ramirez! Chief Ramirez! They shouted, voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Is it true you were assaulted by your own officers? Were the police targeting you because you're Latina? Will they be fired? The questions came rapid fire, each more pointed than the last. Isabella paused at the top of the courthouse steps, her security detail just behind her. She looked out at the sea of cameras and voices, and for a split second she thought of walking past them, letting the department issue a bland press release. But then she remembered the look on Jenkins's face, the contempt in Blake's voice, and the hushed whispers of the gallery who had applauded her stand. No, this wasn't a moment to hide. This was a moment to lead. She raised her hand, silencing the crowd instantly. The commanding authority in her gesture was unmistakable. Yes, she began, her voice steady and clear. I am Isabella Ramirez, the newly appointed chief of police for this city. And yes, earlier today in this very courthouse, 2 of my officers assaulted me without provocation. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Camera shutters clicked furiously. They didn't know who I was, she continued. To them, I was just another woman. Another Latina woman who they believed could be intimidated, shoved, silenced. What they didn't realize is that by targeting me, they exposed a deeper sickness that exists in parts of our force, a sickness of arrogance, a sickness of prejudice, and a sickness of abuse of power. The crowd erupted with murmurs, pens scribbling furiously. She took a step closer to the microphones, her tone sharp but resolute. But let me be absolutely clear. What happened to me today is not about me. I wear this badge with pride, and I have the privilege of defending myself in a courtroom full of witnesses. Countless others in this city don't get that privilege. They are stopped on the street, harassed in their neighborhoods, treated as suspects simply because of the color of their skin or the accent in their voice, and far too often they have no one to believe them when they speak out. A reporter from Channel 7 raised his hand. Chief, do you believe this was racial profiling? Isabella's gaze was piercing. I don't believe it, I know it. Because I've lived it. Long before I was a cop, I was a young Latina woman walking these streets. I've been followed in stores. I've been pulled over for driving in the wrong neighborhood. I know what it feels like to be treated as less. And I know the difference between an honest mistake and a targeted act of disrespect. What happened today wasn't procedure. It was prejudice. The crowd buzzed with intensity. Another reporter shouted, Will Officers Jenkins and Blake be fired? Isabella shook her head slightly. That is for the internal affairs process to decide. But I can promise you this. Their actions will not be swept under the rug. Transparency will be our standard moving forward. Body cam footage, witness testimonies, and full accountability will determine the outcome. Not favoritism, not silence, and not excuses. She paused, letting her words settle. The steps of the courthouse had become a stage, and she was commanding it with precision. Suddenly, a woman's voice rose from the crowd, not a reporter, but a bystander who had followed the commotion from the courtroom. Chief Ramirez, she called, her voice trembling with emotion. Thank you for standing up. I saw everything they did to you. And I've seen it happen to my brother, too. They treated him like dirt for no reason. We never thought anyone would believe us. But seeing you go through it, it means something. The crowd hushed, all eyes turning to the woman. Isabella's expression softened. She stepped down from the podium, weaving through the reporters until she stood before her. What's your name? Isabella asked gently. Maria, the woman replied, her eyes welling with tears. Isabella took her hand firmly. Maria, your brother matters. Your family matters. Every single person in this city matters. And if I have to be thrown in cuffs myself to prove how broken parts of the system are, then so be it. But I promise you, change is coming. The crowd erupted in cheers, raw and unfiltered, but not everyone was clapping. Across the street, leaning against a black SUV, a cluster of officers watched the scene unfold with tight jaws and narrowed eyes. Some were veterans of the old guard, men who saw Isabella's words not as inspiration but as betrayal. She's making us look weak, one muttered. She's airing our dirty laundry in front of the press, another added. Their leader, a grizzled sergeant named McKenna, spat on the ground. She won't last 6 months. Mark my words. Isabella didn't see them, but she could feel it, the resistance brewing inside her own department. Taking a stand meant making enemies, and the battle was only just beginning. Back at the microphones, another reporter fired a question. Chief Ramirez, what will your first official action be now that you've taken command? Isabella squared her shoulders. Effective immediately, I will launch a department-wide review of officer conduct, focusing on complaints of misconduct, racial profiling, and abuse of power. We will not wait for scandals to force reform. We will police ourselves before the public has to demand it. Cheers erupted from community members nearby. The reporters' cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the moment that would headline every evening broadcast. But even as she spoke with fire, Isabella's mind was already calculating. The press conference was a victory, yes, but it was also a challenge. Every promise she made would now be scrutinized, every misstep magnified, and those who wanted her to fail, the ones across the street, the ones in the shadows of the department, would be sharpening their knives. Still, she didn't waver. Let today be a reminder, she declared, raising her badge high for all to see. This symbol is not a shield for abuse. It is a promise of service, and I intend to keep that promise. The crowd roared in approval. As Isabella stepped away from the microphones, reporters still shouting questions, she felt a surge of determination. Today had started as a humiliation, a pair of arrogant officers trying to put her in her place. But it had become something far greater, a rallying cry for justice, and the first test of her leadership. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of the storm. The morning after the courthouse incident, the Los Angeles Police Department headquarters was buzzing like a beehive struck with a stick. Every news outlet in the city had plastered Isabella Ramirez's face on their front pages, the headlines blazing. New police chief assaulted by her own officers. Chief Ramirez calls out racism and abuse of power. A new era or a department in crisis. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Some officers walked with pride, whispering that finally someone in command understood what communities had been crying out for. Others seethed, muttering about betrayal, about airing dirty laundry in public. On the top floor, in the chief's office that now bore her name on the door, Isabella stood at the wide glass window overlooking the city she had sworn to protect. She had slept little, her mind replaying every second of the courthouse, every word to the press, every promise she had made. Now came the hardest part, turning those promises into reality. The knock at her door came sharp and deliberate. "Come in," Isabella said. Deputy Chief Williams entered, a seasoned officer with a reputation for fairness. Behind him trailed 3 captains, each representing different precincts, each carrying their own agendas. "Chief," Williams said, his tone respectful. "We need to talk about yesterday." Isabella turned, her face calm but unreadable. "Yes, let's." Captain Ruiz, a woman with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, spoke first. "Chief, what you did yesterday took courage. The community is rallying behind you. For once, people feel like someone at the top is listening. That's powerful." Captain Dalton, a grizzled veteran with 30 years on the force, slammed his hand on the table. "Powerful? She humiliated the department in front of the press. You don't call out your own people on camera. You deal with it inside, quietly. Now every reporter in America thinks we're corrupt. Because some of us are," Ruiz shot back, "and pretending otherwise is exactly why the public doesn't trust us." The room heated quickly, voices overlapping. Williams finally raised his hands. "Enough. Chief Ramirez didn't call this meeting for us to bicker. Chief, what's your plan?" Isabella stepped forward, placing her badge on the table like a challenge. "My plan," she said firmly, "is accountability. No more cover-ups. No more bearing misconduct in paperwork. We are going to clean our house from the inside out, and if that makes some people uncomfortable, so be it." Dalton scowled. "You'll lose half the department's support if you push this crusade." Isabella's eyes locked on his. "Then half the department needs to decide whether they want to serve the people or serve themselves. This badge doesn't belong to us, it belongs to them." Ruiz nodded in agreement. Williams studied her carefully, then asked, "And the officers from yesterday?" "They'll face internal affairs," Isabella said. "And if the evidence confirms what everyone in that courtroom saw, they'll face termination and charges. Period." The captains exchanged uneasy glances. Isabella knew the old guard would resist her at every step, but she also knew hesitation would kill her leadership before it started. Later that afternoon, she convened her first press conference inside headquarters. Rows of cameras faced her, reporters buzzing with anticipation. Officers lined the back of the room, arms crossed, Their faces a mix of loyalty, doubt, and defiance. She stepped to the podium, her voice strong. Yesterday, 2 officers believed they could treat me with disrespect because they thought I was powerless. They learned the hard way that I was not, but I am not here to settle personal scores. I am here to say this. From this day forward, every person in this city will know that the badge stands for justice, not fear, not prejudice, not abuse. Her words rang like a bell. We will implement mandatory body camera reviews for all field officers. We will expand training in de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. And we will create an independent civilian oversight committee with the authority to review complaints against officers. This department will no longer police itself in the dark. The room stirred. Some reporters scribbled furiously. Others raised eyebrows at the boldness of her plan. But it was the officers in the back whose reaction mattered most. Some looked away, scowling. Others nodded subtly, a spark of hope in their eyes. After the conference, as the room emptied, Isabella felt the weight of footsteps behind her. It was Williams. You know you just declared war on the old boys club, he said quietly. I know, Isabella replied. You're going to have enemies. They'll dig into your past, your family, your career. They'll try to break you. She looked him straight in the eye. Then let them try. I didn't fight my way here to be broken. Williams studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. For what it's worth, Chief, you've got my support. That, she knew, meant more than applause or headlines. That evening, Isabella walked alone through the precinct hallways. Officers glanced up as she passed. Some gave respectful nods. Others whispered under their breath. The department was divided, a fault line running through its core, and she was standing right on it. But when she entered her office again and closed the door, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of Maria, the woman outside the courthouse who had thanked her. She thought of all the families who had been silenced by arrogance, by abuse, by fear, and she thought of the officers who had given their lives doing the job the right way. For them, she would fight. As the city lights flickered outside her window, Isabella placed her badge back on her desk and whispered to herself, this is just the beginning. Because she knew the truth. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just an incident. It was a spark. And under her leadership, that spark was going to ignite a fire of change, one that no amount of resistance could put out. And if anyone in her department dared to stand in the way, they'd soon learn the same lesson Jenkins and Blake had learned the hard way. No one is above the law, not even the police.